My future mother-in-law kept calling me by my fiancé's ex-wife's name, on purpose, for months. And then, at a family dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped and called her out in front of everyone, but it didn't stop there. A month later, she sent my husband an email, telling him she'd changed her will and had disowned him. For you to understand how I could lose my cool like that, why one dinner could shatter everything, I have to take you back to the very beginning. To that creeping sense of unease that I tried so hard to ignore. Here's the thing. I met Mark, my fiancé now, through a few mutual friends. He was smart, kind, and had this incredible patience. I knew he'd had a difficult first marriage and had spent years recovering from it. I respected that strength in him. When we decided to get engaged after 2 years of dating, I truly believed I had found the happiness of a lifetime. The only thing that made me a little nervous was the official meeting with his mother, Sharon. Mark had told me about his mom. His father passed away early, and she had raised him all on her own. He always spoke of her with a mix of respect and a slight sense of guilt, the kind that devoted children often feel for their single parents. I told myself I had to love her, to cherish the woman who had sacrificed so much for the man I love. But that first meeting at her house planted the very first seeds of doubt in my mind. Sharon's house was sterilely clean. Everything was neat, gleaming and cold, without a trace of the warm messiness of a real home. She welcomed me with a smile that was a little too wide and a brief, formal hug. "Oh, it's so wonderful to finally meet you, Sarah. Mark has told me so much about you." The lunch that followed took place in a strangely tense atmosphere. Sharon kept asking me questions that felt less like conversation and more like a disguised job interview. "So, your job at that marketing firm, is it stable, dear?" she asked, while perfectly cutting her steak. I smiled. "Yes, it's going well. I really love the creative aspect of my work." She nodded, but her eyes weren't on me. "How interesting. I've always thought of marketing as a rather frivolous industry." Crystal, Mark's ex-wife, she was in finance. A very demanding field, of course. She was incredibly ambitious. That was the first time her name was mentioned. Crystal. It felt like an invisible knife had been thrown, and it had landed precisely in the middle of the dinner table. After lunch, as I was helping her clear the table, my eyes landed on a large framed wedding photo placed prominently on the mantelpiece. It was Mark and a beautiful blonde woman, both smiling radiantly. I tried to act natural. "That's a lovely picture," I said. Sharon came to stand beside me, her gaze distant. It was such a happy day. A mother can't just throw away a memory like that, can she? Even if things ended. Her voice was filled with an undisguised sense of loss. I could only remain silent. For the rest of the afternoon, she mentioned Crystal several more times, from how well Crystal could cook a certain dish to how refined Crystal's taste in decor was. On the way home, Mark noticed I was quiet. He took my hand and said, "Don't mind her, okay? Mom can be a bit difficult sometimes. She sacrificed a lot for me." Ah, the sacrifice. I had heard about it. Sharon always talked about how she had to give up her promising career to stay home and raise Mark. But later, through her sister, Aunt Carol, I learned the truth. Sharon had only worked as an accountant for a small firm for about 3 years before she got married. She quit shortly after because she didn't really enjoy it, not because of some grand, noble sacrifice. Yet, that story of her lost career had become the perfect tool to instill guilt and control Mark for the last 30-something years. Things got worse after we got engaged. That's when the name-calling campaign began. The first time was over the phone. She called to ask about our wedding plans. "Now, Crystal, have you two thought about booking the reservation at the X restaurant yet?" I paused for a second. "This is Sarah, Sharon, and yes, we're considering it." "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry, dear." She giggled through the phone. "My mind is so forgetful these days. Don't be mad at me." I believed her. It's normal for older people to get confused. But then the second time happened at a family gathering, just 2 weeks later. In the middle of a crowd, she turned to me and said loudly, "Crystal, could you pass me a glass of water, dear?" The entire room went quiet for a moment. I froze. This time, as I looked directly at her, I saw it. A discreet, almost invisible smile. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was there, cold and triumphant. I knew then. It wasn't a mistake. It continued. On almost every call, at every meeting. It became a sophisticated form of psychological torture. I spoke to Mark about it. He believed me. He spoke to his mother privately. And what was the result? Sharon cried to him, saying she couldn't believe her own son could think such horrible things about her, that she was just getting old. Her memory was failing, and maybe she should just check into a nursing home and get out of our way. Mark was trapped. He felt guilty toward his mother and angry on my behalf. As for me, the anger just simmered inside. I endured it. I smiled through it. I told myself I was doing it for Mark. Until that fateful dinner. I went to her house with a heavy feeling in my gut. I knew she would try something, but I never imagined that it would be the last time I would ever let her do that to me. A few of Sharon's close friends were at the dinner party that night. The atmosphere in the dining room was both elegant and suffocating, just like its owner. From the beginning, I felt like a supporting actor in a play where only Sharon knew the script. She didn't call me Crystal, at least not right away. Instead, she used more subtle daggers. One of her friends, Mrs. Gable, turned to me to ask about my work. "Sarah, dear, I heard your firm just had a very successful campaign." I felt a brief sense of relief, a chance to talk about something I was passionate about. "Yes, we worked very hard on it, and—" "Oh, her work is always so busy," Sharon interjected, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But it's so wonderful when young women have such important, serious careers, isn't it? Like Margaret's daughter, just made senior partner at her law firm. Jobs that have a real impact." She smiled at me, but her eyes were full of condescension. All I could do was swallow hard, the words caught in my throat. Later, she began reminiscing about a trip to Italy from years ago, one that Mark had taken with Crystal. She described in vivid detail the memories those two had made, how happy they were, how Crystal had chosen the most exquisite gifts for her. She was speaking to everyone, but her eyes would occasionally flick toward me, as if to make sure I was receiving the message loud and clear. I was the newcomer, the imperfect replacement. Mark squeezed my hand under the table. He knew exactly what his mother was doing. The final straw came unexpectedly. Mrs. Gable, who seemed like a genuinely kind woman, turned to me again. "Sarah, you and Mark make such a lovely couple. When are you two planning on having babies?" The question was a bit personal, but her intention was sweet. I smiled, about to give a polite, non-committal answer when Sharon let out a loud, sharp laugh. "Oh, Margaret, you're putting her on the spot," she said with a wave of her hand. "We shouldn't pressure them. Crystal, she never wanted to rush into having children. She always said her career came first." And there it was. That name. Spoken so brazenly, in front of everyone, in a context that couldn't be more humiliating. The entire table fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I could feel my cheeks burning, a ringing in my ears. But strangely, in the whirlwind of shame and anger, a cold calm washed over me. I slowly placed my fork down. The sound of metal against ceramic was deafening in the silence. I lifted my head and looked directly into Sharon's eyes. "My name is Sarah," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and sharp. "Sarah, Sarah. For the last 6 months, you have repeatedly called me by your son's ex-wife's name. At first, I gave you the benefit of the doubt. I thought it was a mistake, but it wasn't. It was intentional, wasn't it? A petty, cruel little game you play to make me feel small and unwelcome." Sharon's mouth fell open, a look of pure shock and offense on her face. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the truth," I continued, not giving her a chance to play the victim. "You're not happy that your son has finally found happiness after his beloved ex-wife cheated on him and left him. You hate that he moved on from the toxic marriage you pushed him into in the first place. And instead of being happy for him, you take your bitterness out on me." I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. "But the worst part isn't how you treat me. It's how you treat your own son. You don't care about his feelings, about the trauma he's had to endure. All you care about is your own pride. And I feel sorry for you." You have a wonderful son, but you are going to lose him, not because of me, but because of your own selfishness." With that, I turned and walked away. I didn't cry. I wasn't shaking. I just felt an empty sense of release. I hadn't taken 3 steps before Mark was right behind me. He didn't say a word. He put his fork down on his plate with a loud clink, looked at his mother with an ice-cold stare, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "We're leaving." He took my hand, and we walked out of that house together, leaving a stunned dinner party in our wake. We had just gotten into the car when Mark's phone rang. It was Sharon. Mark looked at me, then he answered and put it on speakerphone. Sharon's voice flooded the small space of the car. "Mark, how dare you humiliate me like that? Do you have any idea what that girl just said to me in front of my friends?" Mark kept his voice perfectly calm. "I know exactly what she said, and she wasn't wrong about any of it." "What? You're defending her? After everything I've done for you?" "Everything you've done for me doesn't give you the right to hurt the woman I love," Mark replied, his voice now hard as steel. "I warned you about this. I asked you to stop. You didn't listen. Tonight was the consequence. I'm not discussing this over the phone. Don't call again." He hung up. The car fell into silence, filled only by the sound of the engine and our breathing. He reached over and took my hand, which was still clenched tightly. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I should have ended this a long time ago." I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I felt like we were truly a team. The war had just begun, but at least I wasn't fighting it alone anymore. The 2 days after the dinner party were strangely quiet. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken tension. Mark and I were a solid unit, moving around our apartment in a quiet dance of mutual support, but we were both braced for the next move. We knew Sharon wouldn't just let it go. A woman like her, so obsessed with control and her public image, would see my outburst not as a consequence of her actions, but as a declaration of war. We just didn't know which front she would attack from next. As it turns out, her first move was to try and rally the troops, but she quickly discovered that her entire army had deserted her years ago. I found all this out later from Mark's Aunt Carol, Sharon's younger sister. What I'm about to tell you is the story as Carol recounted it to me, and it was the moment I realized the true depth of Sharon's isolation. The morning after the dinner, Sharon called Carol in a complete frenzy. She apparently didn't even say hello, just launched into a tirade. "She screamed at me, Carol, in my own home," Sharon had wailed into the phone. This girl that Mark brought home, she stood up in the middle of dinner and just screamed at me. She accused me of the most horrible things, in front of Margaret and all my friends. I've never been so humiliated in my entire life." Aunt Carol, who has a calm, no-nonsense demeanor that I've come to adore, let her finish. She listened to Sharon describe how I was a disrespectful, manipulative gold digger who was trying to poison her son against her. She ended her performance with what she clearly thought was her trump card. "And Mark, he just let her," she cried. "He took her side. He walked out with her and left me there to pick up the pieces. Can you believe that? After everything I've done for him, he chose her over his own mother. You have to talk to him, Carol. You have to make him see what this girl is doing to our family." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. And then, Aunt Carol delivered a response that Sharon was clearly not expecting. "Sharon, what exactly did you think was going to happen?" Carol's voice was weary, like she'd had this conversation 100 times before. What are you talking about?" Sharon stammered. "I'm talking about the way you've treated that boy his entire life," Carol said, her voice firm. "The guilt trips, the passive aggression, the constant need to be the center of his universe. Did you really think he'd find a strong, smart woman who would just sit there and take it forever?" "She called me a bad mother." "Well, sometimes you are," Carol replied bluntly. "Do you remember what you tried to do at my wedding? When you went around telling all our cousins that my John was marrying beneath him? Or how you've criticized every major decision I've ever made since we were children? You push and you push until people break, and then you act shocked when they finally do. Frankly, Sharon, I'm not surprised this happened. I'm surprised it took this long. And I'm glad Mark has finally found someone with a backbone. He's needed one to stand up to you for years." Sharon was apparently so stunned that she just hung up. Her first attempt to build an army against me had resulted in her most trusted lieutenant defecting to my side. But the story doesn't end there. The next afternoon, while I was sitting at home, anxiously replaying the dinner party in my head for the 1,000th time, my phone rang with an unknown number. My heart leaped into my throat, assuming it was one of Sharon's friends calling to scold me. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick it up. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Sarah, this is Carol, Mark's aunt. I know this is out of the blue, but I needed to call you." I was speechless. I gripped the phone tighter. "Oh, hello, Carol. It's nice to hear from you." "Listen, dear," she said, her voice warm and kind. "First of all, I am so sorry for what my sister put you through. No one deserves to be treated like that, especially not in their own future family." Tears immediately welled up in my eyes. Just hearing someone acknowledge it was like a dam breaking inside me. "But the main reason I'm calling," she continued, "is that I wanted you to know you're not crazy, you didn't overreact, and you are not alone. She's been like this her whole life." I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you so much." My sister, she thrives on making other people feel small to make herself feel important. She did it to me my whole life. She did it to her own husband when he was alive, and she's been doing it to Mark since the day he was born. What you did, standing up to her, that was brave. And it was necessary." She paused, then added, "I know Mark loves you very much. I can see how happy he is with you. You are the best thing that's happened to that boy in a long time." We talked for another 20 minutes. She told me a funny story about how Sharon once tried to sabotage her prize-winning rose bushes out of jealousy. We laughed. It felt incredible. She ended the call by saying, "Don't you let her get to you. You and Mark build your life and you be happy. And please consider me your family. Welcome to the sane side of it anyway." When I hung up the phone, I was crying, but not from anger or humiliation anymore. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The feeling of validation was so powerful, it felt like a physical weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't just some girl fighting against Mark's difficult mother. I had an ally, and Sharon wasn't some powerful matriarch who had the whole family in her thrall. She was just a lonely, bitter woman whose power was finally beginning to crumble. A few days after the call from Aunt Carol, the atmosphere in our apartment had shifted. The anxiety had been replaced by a sense of firm resolve. We knew we were right, and we knew we had an ally, but we also knew this couldn't be the end. Mark said he needed to see his mother one last time, face to face. Not to yell or argue, but to give her one final chance to understand, to make a clear choice about the future. I agreed, though I didn't have much hope. Mark went to Sharon's house alone on a Saturday afternoon. He recounted the entire conversation to me later. The house was as cold and silent as ever. Sharon answered the door looking deliberately frail and sad. She was wearing an old sweater, no makeup, and her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying for days. This was Act 1, the pitiful victim. She didn't invite him into the living room, but led him to the kitchen, which smelled faintly of chamomile tea. "I haven't slept since that night," she began, her voice trembling. "I just keep thinking about it. I can't believe the son I sacrificed my entire life to raise would just stand there and watch me be humiliated in my own home." Mark didn't fall for the performance. He sat down and looked her straight in the eye. "Mom, I'm not here to argue about what happened. I'm here because I need you to understand that your actions hurt Sarah, and they hurt me. You're deliberately calling her by the wrong name is unacceptable." "I'm getting old, Mark. My memory isn't what it used to be," she retorted, her voice rising. "Why do you both insist on treating me like some kind of evil monster?" "This isn't about your memory," Mark said patiently. "You know exactly what you were doing. I just want to know why. Why are you so hard on her?" And then Sharon unleashed a torrent of bitter, self-pitying words. How she only wanted what was best for him. How Crystal, for all her faults, was at least from a suitable background. How I, a woman in the frivolous marketing industry, would never understand traditional values. How I was controlling him and trying to tear their family apart. Mark just listened in silence, When she had run out of things to say, he finally spoke, and this time, his voice was filled with a deep exhaustion and sadness. "I understand. You're never going to accept her," he said. "So then, I need you to think about the future. Sarah and I are getting married. We're going to have children. Do you want to be a part of that life? Do you want to meet your grandchildren? Because if you continue to treat Sarah this way, if you cannot respect her as my wife, then the answer will be no. I will not allow my children to grow up in a toxic environment where their mother is disrespected. I'm giving you a choice. Either you respect my family, or you won't be a part of it." Mark said it was the first time he'd ever seen his mother's confident facade truly crack. Real fear flickered in her eyes. She said nothing more, just gave a slow nod and said she needed time to think. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sharon. It read, "Sarah, I am sorry that my words made you feel hurt." I read the message twice, then showed it to Mark. He read it, and a long, frustrated sigh escaped his chest. "See," he said, "this isn't an apology. This is her saying, 'I'm sorry you had an inappropriate reaction.' She's not sorry for what she did. She's just trying to placate us to get what she wants." It was a classic non-apology, a textbook move for a manipulator. Our disappointment quickly morphed into disgust. Mark's ultimatum had worked, but not in the way we'd hoped. It didn't make her self-reflect, it just made her change tactics. And when that tactic failed, she deployed her final weapon, the flying monkey. The next evening, Mark got a call from Uncle David. David was his father's best friend, a man Mark had always respected as a second father. "Mark, my boy, it's David." His voice was as warm as ever. "How have you been?" After a few minutes of pleasantries, David got to the point. "Listen, son, I heard about what happened at your mother's house. I know your mom can be difficult, but she loves you so much. You know, ever since your father passed, you've been her whole world." Mark was silent, waiting. "She's your mother, Mark," David continued, his tone full of gentle persuasion. "Old people are just set in their ways. Sometimes they say things they don't mean. You're the man, the future head of the family. You should be the bigger person. Sometimes you just have to give a little to keep the peace, son. Don't let an outsider disrupt the bond between a mother and son." "An outsider?" Mark asked, his voice instantly turning cold. "Sarah is not an outsider. She is my future wife. She is my family. And she deserves to be respected." I understand, David said quickly. "I just mean, don't sweat the small stuff. Your mother is in a lot of pain. All you have to do is call her, say you're sorry for making a scene, and this will all blow over." Mark took a deep breath. "I appreciate your concern, Uncle David, but this isn't about giving in. This is about respect. And my mother did not respect my fiancé. Until she truly understands that and offers a genuine apology, there's nothing more to talk about. I hope you can understand." He ended the call politely but firmly. He put the phone down on the table and turned to look at me. The expression on his face was no longer angry or sad. It was blank, filled with a terrifyingly clear sense of realization. "It's over," he said quietly. "There's no other way. She will never stop. She sent a fake apology, and now she sent the man I respect most in the world to manipulate me. She will use anyone, anything to get what she wants." He took my hands in his. "We can't live like this, Sarah. We can't always be waiting for the next attack. This has to end, for good." And in that moment, I knew we had reached the end of the road. There were no more detours. There was only one thing left to do. We didn't act immediately after the call from Uncle David. That whole night we just sat together in silence. The hard truth hung in the air between us. There was no more hope, no more excuses. There was only one option left, and it felt as heavy as a stone. Mark knew he had to be the one to do it. The next morning, he sat at the kitchen table, holding his phone, just staring at it for a long time. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. He looked up at me, and in his eyes was a storm of love, duty, sadness, and exhaustion. "I'm here with you," I said softly. He nodded, took a deep breath, and dialed. He put the phone on speaker. After 2 rings, Sharon's voice answered, sounding annoyed. "What is it?" "Mom, it's me," Mark said. his voice eerily steady. "I'm calling to say, it's over." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about? What's over?" "This is over," Mark repeated. "I gave you every chance. I came to talk. I asked you to respect Sarah. I made the consequences clear. And how did you respond? You sent a fake apology, and then you had Uncle David call me to manipulate me. I see it clearly now. You don't want reconciliation, Mom. You just want control." "I just want my son back." Her voice started to rise into a wail. "That girl is turning you against me." "No, Mom," Mark interrupted, and this time there was no patience left in his voice, only the raw truth. "She didn't do anything. You pushed me away. You created this war. I will always love you because you are my mother, but I can't have you in my life anymore. It isn't healthy. I need to protect my family, and I need to protect my own mental health." "Mark, don't," she began to plead. "Goodbye, Mom," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. Then he hung up. He sat motionless for a few minutes, his head in his hands. I didn't say anything, just sat down next to him and put my arm around him. There was no celebration, no feeling of victory, just a deep, profound sadness for a relationship that could have been, but was ultimately destroyed by one person's pride and fear. The first few weeks after that were strange. The house was unusually quiet. Mark was subdued. I knew he was grieving. One evening, I found him looking through old photo albums from his childhood, pictures of him and his mother, smiling and happy. Cutting off a toxic relationship doesn't mean you don't mourn the good parts that once existed. But then, a change began to happen, slowly but surely. I noticed he stopped flinching every time his phone rang. He started sleeping through the night without tossing and turning. His smile became easier, more genuine. One afternoon, while we were walking in the park, he burst out laughing at a stupid joke I made. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't heard him laugh like that, truly, freely laugh, in a very, very long time. It was like a heavy, dark cloud he had carried his entire life had finally dissipated, revealing the blue sky I always knew was there. About a month after the final call, on a normal Tuesday evening, we were cooking dinner together in the kitchen, soft music playing from a small speaker. Mark's phone chimed with a new email notification. He pulled it out to check, and the smile on his face vanished. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. He didn't say anything, just handed me the phone. It was an email from Sharon. It was short, cold, and clinical. It stated that she had met with her attorney that day and had officially removed him, Mark, her only son, from her will. All of her assets would be donated to a handful of charities. The email ended with a single sentence. "As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a son." I finished reading, my throat suddenly dry. This was it, the final attack, her ultimate declaration of power and punishment. I looked up at Mark, not knowing what to say. He was looking at me, and then, the most unexpected thing happened. The corner of his mouth twitched into a smile. I looked at him, surprised, and then I felt a smile forming on my own lips. My smile turned into a quiet chuckle. His chuckle joined mine. And then, the two of us, standing there in our kitchen, just started laughing. A loud, freeing, and completely genuine laugh. It wasn't a laugh of malice or hatred. It was the laugh of liberation. In that moment, we both realized something. She had fired her last and most powerful weapon, money and disownment, and it was pathetically useless. It couldn't touch us anymore. Her power over us was completely gone. She had lost the only real weapon she ever had, the love and loyalty of her son. And all that was left was an empty email. 6 months after the email, Mark and I got married. There was no grand, opulent ceremony. We didn't want one. Instead, we exchanged our vows in a small, beautiful garden with about 30 people who genuinely loved and supported us. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt simple. Sharon was not there. She was not invited. Her absence wasn't a void. It was a peaceful, quiet space that we filled with our own happiness. Aunt Carol was there, of course. She hugged me so tightly before the ceremony and whispered in my ear, "I have never seen my nephew look so happy. Thank you." There was no drama, no tension, no one looking over their shoulder. It was just a perfect day. As we settled into married life, the peace we felt after cutting contact with Sharon solidified into a new normal. Mark continued to transform back into the light, easygoing man I had first fallen in love with. The weight of his mother's expectations and manipulations had been so immense, he hadn't even realized how much it was crushing him until it was gone. We had our own lives, our own home, and our own rules, and the most important rule was respect. A few more months passed, filled with the quiet joys of building a life together. One sunny Sunday, we went over to Aunt Carol's for a casual brunch. It had become a regular, comforting tradition. After we ate, as we were sitting in her cozy living room, Mark and I looked at each other and smiled. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small folded photograph. "Carol, we have something we wanted to share with you," I said, handing it to her. She unfolded it carefully. Her eyes widened as she saw the grainy black and white image. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Is this... Sarah, are you..." I nodded, my grin so wide it hurt my cheeks. "You're going to be a great aunt." Aunt Carol let out a whoop of pure joy, pulling both of us into a massive hug. She was ecstatic, asking a million questions about due dates and doctor's appointments. Her happiness for us so genuine and uncomplicated it filled the entire room. As the excitement settled, a brief, wistful look crossed her face. "It's a shame," she said softly. "It's such a shame your mom can't be here to see this, Mark." Mark's expression was calm. "It was her choice, Carol." I know, she sighed. "I ran into Margaret the other day, one of her old bridge partners. She said none of them really call Sharon anymore. All she ever talks about is how she has no son, how ungrateful you were. She's managed to push everyone away. It's sad, really." We sat with that thought for a moment. There was no joy in hearing about Sharon's loneliness, no sense of victory. There was only a quiet sadness for a life being wasted on bitterness. Her self-inflicted isolation was the natural consequence of a lifetime of her choices, and it had nothing to do with us anymore. Later that evening, back in our own home, I was looking at the ultrasound picture again, tracing the tiny shape with my finger. Mark came and sat beside me on the sofa, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. He gently placed his other hand over mine on my stomach. We looked at the picture together, this small, incredible promise of a new beginning. "We're going to do things differently," he said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. "This family, our family, is going to be built on respect and unconditional love. No games, no manipulation." He leaned over and kissed my forehead. "Our child will only ever know peace in this home." I looked from the picture to his face, and I saw our entire future reflected in his eyes, calm, bright, and finally, completely free.